stood in the middle of the marble floor, dripping rainwater onto the white tiles. She was maybe 7 years old, thin as a stalk of grass, with eyes that looked too old for her face. She didn't make a sound. Her clothes were torn in 3 places. Her feet were bare and caked with dried mud that the rain was now washing onto Dajuma's expensive floor. She held nothing. No bag, no toy, no possession of any kind. Just her small body, shivering slightly, watching everything with those ancient eyes that had seen far too much. Dajuma's wife, Kireni, stood at the top of the stairs in her silk robe, staring down at them. Her face was a mask of controlled anger. "What is this?" she asked, her voice echoing in the tall entrance hall. Behind her, the chandelier threw fractured light across the walls. The house was silent except for the sound of water dripping from the girl's hair onto the floor. Kireni's gold bracelets caught the light as she gripped the banister. She descended 1 step, then stopped, waiting for an answer. "Her name is Zafan," Dajuma said quietly. He stood beside the girl, his expensive suit also wet from the rain. He'd carried her from the car. She'd weighed almost nothing. "I found her at the junction near the factory. She's been living under the bridge." His voice was steady, but something in it was different. Kireni heard it immediately. This wasn't a discussion. This was a decision already made. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the tone. It was the same voice he used when closing business deals. Kireni descended the rest of the stairs slowly, her gold bracelets clinking with each step. The sound was sharp in the quiet house. She wore 3 bracelets on each wrist, gifts from Dajuma over the years. Each one had cost more than most people earned in a year. Her silk robe was imported from Asia. Her slippers were hand-embroidered. Everything about her spoke of wealth and taste. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, close enough to see the girl clearly now, close enough to see the dirt, the torn clothes, the vacant stare. "And you brought her here?" Kireni's voice was cold now, all pretense of calm gone. "To our home? Without asking me? Without even calling to warn me?" She looked at the girl with undisguised disgust, not at the child herself perhaps, but at what she represented, at the disruption, at the invasion of their carefully ordered life, at the audacity of her husband making such a decision alone. "We don't even know this child. We don't know where she came from. She could be anyone, anything." "She has nowhere else," Dajuma said simply. He placed his hand gently on Zafan's shoulder. The girl didn't flinch or lean into the touch. She simply accepted it, the way she seemed to accept everything. "I've been watching her for 2 weeks. Every morning she sits by the roadside near the factory gate. She doesn't beg. She doesn't ask anyone for anything. She just sits there. When it rains, she goes under the bridge. When it stops, she comes back out. That's all. Just existing. Waiting for nothing." Kireni's laugh was sharp and bitter. "So you want to keep her? Like a stray dog you found on the street?" She descended the final steps and walked closer, her eyes scanning the girl from head to toe. Zafan's eyes moved between them, watching the exchange like a spectator at a match. She didn't flinch at the words. She didn't react to the cruelty in Kireni's voice. She just watched, absorbed, learned. It was the watching that disturbed Kireni most. Those eyes that saw too much, that judged, that remembered. Dajuma had built his fortune in construction, starting with nothing 20 years ago. He'd mixed cement with his own hands, carried bricks on his back, worked under the sun until his skin burned and peeled. Now he owned 3 factories that produced building materials, 2 housing estates on the edge of the city, and a fleet of 30 trucks that moved goods across 4 states. Money had come to him like rain in the wet season, steady and abundant. But children had not. 15 years of marriage, and Kireni's womb had remained silent. Empty. They'd tried everything. Doctors in 3 countries, traditional healers who made promises and took their money, prayers at churches and mosques and shrines, herbs that tasted like dirt, injections that left bruises, procedures that left scars, visible and invisible. Nothing worked. With each failure, Kireni had grown harder, more brittle. The softness she'd had when they married had calcified into something cold and defensive. She blamed herself. Then she blamed him. Then she blamed God. Then she blamed everyone and no one, her anger finding no landing place. "We'll take her to the hospital tomorrow," Dejuma said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Get her checked by doctors. Make sure she's healthy. We'll ask questions. Try to find if she has family looking for her, if there's anyone who's missing her, if there's a home she's supposed to be in." He paused, looked down at Safan. The girl was still watching Kireni with those unreadable eyes. "And if we can't find anyone, if there's no one searching for her, then we help her. We give her a chance." Kireni's face transformed. Her features twisted into something ugly. "Help her how? By playing house? By pretending she's ours? By dressing her up and giving her things and acting like we're some kind of saviors?" Her voice rose with each question. "You want to adopt some random child from the street because we couldn't have our own? Is that it? You want a replacement? A substitute for what my body couldn't give you?" The words came out like weapons, sharp, intended to wound. The pain behind them was obvious. Dejuma looked at his wife for a long moment. Years of arguments, of disappointments, of growing distance stood between them. He could see all of it in her face right now. The hurt, the anger, the fear that this child somehow diminished her, that she was being replaced, that after all these years of trying, he'd given up and found an easier solution. But that wasn't it. Not really. He didn't know how to explain what he'd felt watching this girl day after day. The pull, the recognition, the certainty. "Yes," he said quietly, "if that's what it takes." The words landed like stones in still water. Final, irreversible. Kireni's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then the moment passed and her face became stone again. She turned without another word and walked back up the stairs. Each step was measured, controlled, dignified. Her bedroom door closed with a solid click that echoed through the house like a gunshot. The housekeeper, an older woman named Falara, appeared from the kitchen doorway. She'd been listening, of course. The house wasn't large enough to hide such arguments. She was 63 years old, had worked for Dejuma for 12 years, and had watched the marriage slowly deteriorate. She'd seen Kireni's desperation turn to bitterness. She'd seen Dejuma's hope turn to resignation. She looked at Zafan now and shook her head slowly, but not unkindly. Just with the weariness of someone who knew this child represented chaos neither of them was prepared for. "Come, child," Falara said softly, extending her hand. "Let's get you washed and fed. You look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks." Safan looked at Dejuma first, as if asking permission. He nodded. Only then did she follow Falara toward the back of the house where the bathroom was. She walked with small, careful steps, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the marble. She didn't look around at the expensive furniture or the paintings or the evidence of wealth everywhere. She just followed Falara like a ghost following a guide. That night, Dejuma sat in his study, unable to work. The contracts on his desk demanded attention, but his mind was elsewhere. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city spreading below his hilltop home like fallen stars. The view had cost him extra when he'd bought the land. He'd thought it would bring him peace. It never had. The house was too large, too empty, too full of rooms that served no purpose. 5 bedrooms for 2 people. A dining table that seated 12, but usually held only 2 plates at opposite ends. He thought about the first time he'd seen Zafan, 2 weeks ago, though it felt longer. She'd been sitting on a concrete block near the factory gate, watching the trucks come and go with mechanical efficiency. The factory operated around the clock, trucks arriving and leaving in constant rotation. Most people ignored the activity after a while, became blind to it. But she'd watched like she was studying something important. One of his drivers, a man named Bakwe, had shouted at her to move. She was blocking the sightline, creating a hazard. She'd stood up without protest and walked exactly 10 paces away, then sat down again on the dirt. Same position, same expression. The next day, she was back in the exact same spot, and the day after that. By the 4th day, Bakwe stopped shouting at her. By the 5th day, some of the workers were leaving her scraps of food. She ate what was given and saved nothing. When there was no food, she didn't complain. She just sat and watched the trucks. Like it was her job, her purpose. On the 5th day, Dejuma had stopped his car and approached her directly. His driver had protested, "Sir, she might be sick. She might have something contagious." But Dejuma ignored him. He walked up to the girl and squatted down to her level. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him with those eyes that seemed to contain centuries of knowledge. "Are you hungry?" he'd asked. She'd nodded once. A simple movement. No dramatics. No pleading expression. Just acknowledgement of fact. Yes, she was hungry. He'd sent his driver to the food stall across the road to buy rice and stew. When it came wrapped in a plastic bag, he'd handed it to her. She'd opened it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. Then she'd eaten slowly, methodically, chewing each bite thoroughly. The way someone eats who knows hunger intimately, who understands that food is not guaranteed, who has learned to make everything last. She'd eaten exactly half the portion, then carefully wrapped up the rest, saving it, planning ahead, surviving. "Where are your parents?" he'd asked. She'd opened her mouth and he'd seen her throat work, seen the effort, but no sound came out. Her face had shown frustration for just a moment, then acceptance. She'd touched her throat with small fingers and shook her head. The gesture was clear. She couldn't speak, wouldn't speak. The voice was gone. He'd asked her more questions. She'd communicated through gestures, through expressions, through the remarkable clarity of her eyes, but no words, no sound. Just silence that somehow communicated volumes. Over the next week, he'd learned her patterns through observation. She slept under the bridge. He'd followed her one evening to confirm it. The space was dry but exposed, surrounded by trash and the constant noise of traffic overhead. She had a piece of cardboard she used as a mat. Nothing else. No blanket, no pillow, just cardboard and concrete. In the morning, she'd roll up the cardboard and hide it behind a support pillar, then walk to a public tap 6 blocks away to wash her face and drink water. She'd return to her spot by the factory by 7 in the morning and stay until dark. When people gave her food, she ate. When they didn't, she waited. She never begged, never asked, never put out her hand or made pitiful faces. She simply existed in proximity to humans, hoping for kindness, but not expecting it. She watched children go to school in their uniforms. She watched women carry babies. She watched men argue and laugh and work. She absorbed the world like someone studying a foreign language, trying to understand the rules. Now she was upstairs in his house, probably asleep in a real bed for the first time in months, maybe years, maybe ever. He didn't know her history, didn't know what had brought her to that bridge, didn't know why she couldn't speak or where her parents had gone. The mystery of her should have made him cautious, should have made him call the authorities, let them handle it properly. But something in him had recognized something in her, a kinship of loss, of being alone in rooms full of people. The hospital visit 2 days later revealed very little useful information. Dr. Yenemy, a thorough man Dejuma had known for years, examined Zafan completely. She weighed 18 kilograms, severely underweight for her estimated age of 7 years. She had old scars on her legs and back, consistent with falls and accidents. Nothing that suggested abuse, but plenty that suggested neglect. Hard living. Her teeth were surprisingly good, which suggested she hadn't always been on the streets. Someone had cared for her once, had taught her to clean her teeth, to wash, to maintain herself. The examination of her throat showed no physical damage, no scarring, no malformation, no medical reason for her inability to speak. Dr. Yenemy had tested her hearing. Perfect. Her understanding of language, excellent. She could follow complex instructions, respond to questions with gestures, communicate clearly through movement. The mechanism was intact. Psychological trauma, Dr. Yenemy had said, removing his examination gloves. Sometimes children who witness terrible things simply stop speaking. The mind protects itself through silence. The voice may return when she feels safe, or it may not. There's no way to predict. Can anything be done? Dejuma had asked. Therapy, treatment. Dr. Yenemy had shrugged. Safety, stability, time. Those are the only treatments for this kind of wound. If she begins to trust the world again, the voice might follow, but you can't force it. Pressure will only drive it deeper underground. Zafan had sat on the examination table through this entire conversation, watching both men discuss her as if she wasn't there. But her eyes showed she understood every word. Understood that her silence was being categorized, medicalized, made into something to be fixed. They'd gone to the police station next, a crumbling building in the administrative district. Dejuma had asked about missing children reports. The officer on duty, a tired woman named Sergeant Helene, had searched through stacks of files that looked like they hadn't been organized in years. "How old is the child?" she'd asked. "Maybe 7, Dejuma had said. "Maybe younger. Hard to tell." Sergeant Helene had pulled out a ledger book with handwritten entries. She'd run her finger down page after page of names and descriptions. "Nothing matches," she'd said finally. "We have 3 missing girls reported in the past 6 months, but they're all older. Teenagers. This one?" She'd looked at Zafon with something like pity. "Nobody's looking for her, or if they are, they didn't bother reporting it." The words had landed heavily. Nobody's looking for her. She was unclaimed, unwanted, a child the world had lost and not bothered to find. "What do you want to do with her?" Sergeant Helene had asked. "Keep her," Dejuma had said. "I want to adopt her." The sergeant had looked surprised. "You know the process is complicated, especially for a child with no records. No birth certificate, no known relatives. It could take months, maybe over a year." Dejuma had nodded. "I have time and money for lawyers. Whatever it takes." Sergeant Helene had studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll start the paperwork. But you'll need to register her temporary guardianship first, and you'll need your wife's consent." That last part had been a problem. He'd known it even before the words were spoken. Karenni had wanted to take Safan to an orphanage immediately. "We've done our part," she'd said that evening over dinner. She hadn't touched her food, neither had he. They sat at opposite ends of the long table, the distance between them feeling like miles. "We took her in. We got her medical attention. We tried to find her family. We fulfilled any moral obligation. But she's not our responsibility. She's not our child. There are places designed for situations like this. Professional places with trained people who know how to handle traumatized children. She is our responsibility now," Dejuma had said quietly. "From the moment I brought her through that door, she became our responsibility." Karenni's fork clattered against her plate. "Your responsibility. You brought her here. You decided this. You made this choice without consulting me, without considering how I might feel, without thinking about what this means for us, for our marriage." Her voice was shaking now. "You're not thinking clearly. This isn't about charity or helping someone in need. You want to replace what we don't have. You want a child, and since I can't give you one, you found one on the street." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dejuma set down his glass carefully. "Maybe I do," he said. The honesty seemed to surprise them both. "Maybe I'm tired of this house being empty. Maybe I'm tired of having all this wealth and nothing meaningful to do with it. Maybe I see a child who needs help, and I have the ability to help her. And that feels like enough of a reason." He paused. "Maybe I'm tired of us existing in separate rooms, passing each other like strangers, pretending we're still a marriage when we're just 2 people sharing an address." Karenni's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you? How dare you blame me for—" She stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew what she couldn't say. Couldn't give you children. Couldn't be a mother. Couldn't fulfill the one role women are supposed to fulfill. The silence stretched between them, full of 15 years of disappointment, of failed treatments and broken hopes. Of blame that had nowhere to land, so it circulated between them endlessly, poisoning everything it touched. "I won't be part of this," Karenni said finally. "You want to play father to a stranger's child? Fine, that's your choice. But don't expect me to play mother. Don't expect me to pretend this is normal or good or anything except what it is. A desperate attempt to fill a void that can't be filled." She'd stood up from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'll sleep in the guest wing from now on. You can have your little project, your charity case, your replacement daughter, but keep her away from me." She'd walked out of the dining room without looking back. That night, Dejuma had heard her moving things. Clothes, personal items, creating distance, building walls. By morning, she'd fully relocated to the guest wing, 3 rooms at the opposite end of the house that might as well have been a different continent. Weeks passed in this new configuration. The house became 2 territories, Kirini's domain in the West Wing. Dajuma's world in the main house was Zafan. They saw each other rarely. When they did, they were coldly polite, like business associates forced to share a workspace. Kirini left early for her volunteer work with the women's club. She returned late. She took meals in her room. She stopped attending family gatherings. When relatives asked where she was, Dajuma made excuses. She was tired. She was traveling. She sent her regards. Zafan settled into the house like water finding its level. She learned quickly, absorbed everything. Fulara taught her domestic tasks, folding clothes with precision, setting the table properly, watering the garden plants in the cool morning hours. The girl worked with quiet efficiency, never complaining, never asking for anything beyond what was given. She seemed grateful for everything. A clean towel, hot food, a soft bed. Things other children took for granted were miracles to her. She never took anything without permission, never wasted anything, never left a light burning or water running. Dajuma hired a private tutor, a retired teacher named Mr. Galami, who'd educated half the wealthy children in the city. He came 3 times a week with books and charts and the patience of someone who genuinely loved teaching. At first, he'd been skeptical. A street child who can't speak? How am I supposed to teach her? But within 1 week, he was converted. She's brilliant, he'd told Dajuma in amazement. Absolutely brilliant. She learns faster than any student I've ever had. She can't speak, but she communicates perfectly through writing. Her handwriting is already better than most 10-year-olds. It was true. Zafan absorbed knowledge like dry earth absorbing rain. Mr. Galami taught her to read, and within 2 weeks she was reading simple books. Within a month, she was reading at a 3rd grade level. Within 3 months, she was writing full sentences, expressing complex thoughts on paper. Her handwriting was small and precise, each letter perfectly formed. She wrote the way she did everything, carefully, thoroughly, with intense concentration. She filled notebooks with observations, questions, thoughts she couldn't voice but needed to express. One evening, about 4 months after she'd arrived, she brought Dajuma a note. He was in his study reviewing contracts. She knocked on the doorframe. She always knocked, always waited for permission to enter. He waved her in. She approached his desk and set down a piece of paper. Her handwriting was neat. Thank you for letting me stay. I know I make things difficult. I know Kirini is angry because of me. I'm sorry. Dajuma read the note twice. Then he set it down carefully and looked at her. She was standing very still, waiting for his response. Her face was composed, but her hands were clasped tightly together. Nervous. You're not a guest, Zafan, he said gently. This is your home now. You don't have to thank me for letting you stay. And you're not making things difficult. The difficulties between Kirini and me existed long before you arrived. You didn't create them. You just revealed them. She picked up her pencil and wrote on a new sheet. Why did you choose me? He thought about that question for a long time. She waited patiently, not rushing him. Finally, he said, because you were sitting there, day after day, and I couldn't drive past you anymore. I couldn't go to my factory and make money and go home to my empty house and pretend I hadn't seen you. Pretend you didn't exist. Every time I saw you, I thought about all the children like you, invisible, ignored, treated like they don't matter. And I thought, if I can help one, just one, maybe that means something. She wrote, does it? Does it what? Means something. He smiled, though it was sad. Ask me in a year. Ask me when you're grown. Ask me when you've had time to decide if I did right by you or if I just disrupted your life in a different way. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she wrote one more thing. You did right. And she left the study as quietly as she'd entered, leaving the notes on his desk. He kept them, put them in a drawer with other important papers, evidence that his choice had mattered to at least one person. The adoption process began officially 6 months after Zafan arrived. Dajuma hired the best family lawyer in the city, a sharp woman named Mrs. Takami, who'd handled hundreds of complicated cases. She laid out the challenges immediately. The child has no documentation, no birth certificate, no medical records, No proof of identity. That makes things legally complicated. We'll need to establish her as a ward of the state first, then petition for adoption. The process typically takes 6 to 12 months for a normal case. This won't be normal. How long? Dejuma asked. Mrs. Takami shuffled papers. 12 to 18 months. Maybe longer if there are complications. And there will be complications. Social workers will investigate your home, your marriage, your finances, your motives. They'll interview the child, though that's difficult since she can't speak. They'll want psychological evaluations, medical reports, character witnesses. The state doesn't give children away easily, even children nobody wanted. She paused. And there's another complication. You're married. Normally, both spouses must consent to an adoption. Does your wife support this? No, Dejuma said simply. She doesn't. Mrs. War, Takami's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. That's a significant problem. The law allows for single-parent adoption in cases where the spouse is incapacitated, absent, or has abandoned the family. But if your wife actively opposes the adoption, she can block it. She has legal standing. You'll need to either convince her to consent or, she trailed off. Or what? Or file for legal separation. Remove her consent from the equation. But that's obviously a drastic step. Dejuma sat back in his chair. We're already separated. We live in the same house, but we might as well be divorced. She wants nothing to do with Safan. She's made that clear. Mrs. Takami made notes. I'll need that documented. Statements from household staff, evidence of the separation. If we can prove she's abandoned her parental responsibilities, we can proceed without her consent. But it won't be pleasant. She can fight it, make things ugly. Dejuma thought about Kareni, about the anger that simmered beneath her polished surface, about the hurt that had calcified into cruelty. She'll fight it, he said. She'll make it as difficult as possible, not because she wants Safan, but because she doesn't want me to have her. Mrs. Takami nodded. Then prepare yourself for a battle. These cases get personal, painful. Things will be said and exposed that you might prefer stayed private. Your marriage will be dissected in court. Your relationship, your failures, everything. She looked at him directly. Are you prepared for that? Is the child worth that cost? Yes, Dejuma said without hesitation. She's worth it. Mrs. Takami smiled for the first time. Good, then let's begin. The paperwork started immediately. Forms in triplicate, affidavits, background checks, financial disclosures. A social worker named Miss Karemi was assigned to the case. She was young, probably fresh out of university, with earnest eyes and a clipboard she carried everywhere. She came to the house 3 times asking questions, taking notes, observing Zafan interact with Dejuma and Fulara. Tell me why you want to adopt this specific child, Miss Karemi asked during the second visit. They sat in the living room. Zafan was at her lessons with Mr. Galami in another room. Because she needs a home and I can provide one, Dejuma answered. And what about other children? There are thousands in orphanages. Why not adopt from there? It was a fair question. Because I didn't meet them. I met her. I saw her specific situation. I can't save everyone, but I can save one. Miss Karemi wrote that down. And your wife? Where is she in this? In the West Wing. She doesn't support the adoption. Why not? Dejuma considered how honest to be. Decided on complete honesty. Because we can't have children of our own. Because she sees Zafan as a replacement for what she couldn't give me. Because she's angry at me, at herself, at the situation. Because our marriage was already dying, and this decision accelerated the death. Miss Karemi's pencil moved across the page. She didn't look shocked. Probably heard worse in other cases. And how does Zafan fit into this dynamic? She asked. Does she sense the tension? Is she affected by it? Dejuma nodded. She's very aware. She's offered to leave several times. Written notes apologizing for causing problems? I've told her she's not the problem, that she's not responsible for adult conflicts. Miss Karemi looked up. But in a way, she is the catalyst. Her presence brought existing problems to the surface. Yes, Dejuma agreed. But the problems were already there. She just made them visible. The social worker interviewed Zafan separately. Since the girl couldn't speak, they communicated through writing. Miss Karemi asked questions and Zafan wrote answers in her careful handwriting. Later, Miss Karemi shared some of the responses with Dejuma. She's remarkably mature for her age. When I asked if she wanted to be adopted, she wrote, only if it doesn't hurt anyone. When I asked if she felt safe here, she wrote, safer than I've ever been. When I asked about Kirini, she wrote, she doesn't like me, but she doesn't hurt me. That's enough. Dejuma felt his throat tighten reading those words. That's enough. What kind of life had this child lived where not being hurt was sufficient? Where safety was defined by the absence of harm rather than the presence of love? She has very low expectations, Miss Karemi observed. That's common in children from traumatic backgrounds. They accept crumbs because they've never known a full meal. Your job, if you adopt her, will be teaching her that she deserves more than just enough, that she deserves to be wanted, loved, chosen actively, not just accepted passively. The words struck Dejuma deeply. He realized he'd been so focused on providing material things, food, shelter, education, that he hadn't thought enough about the emotional landscape. About teaching her that she mattered not just as a responsibility, but as a person. That night, he knocked on her bedroom door. She opened it, looking surprised. He rarely came to her room. Can I come in? He asked. She nodded, stepped aside. Her room was neat, almost militarily organized. Bed made perfectly. Books stacked precisely. Nothing out of place. I want to tell you something, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. She sat in her desk chair, watching him with those attentive eyes. The adoption process has started. It's going to take a long time, maybe over a year. There will be interviews and evaluations and people asking you questions. It might be uncomfortable. If at any point you want to stop, you tell me. Write it down, show me, and we stop. You have a choice in this. You always have a choice. She picked up her ever-present notepad and wrote, I want to stay. I know, but I need you to understand something else. This isn't charity. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you or because I want to look like a good person. I'm doing this because I want you as my daughter. Actually want you. Not as a replacement for anything. Not as a solution to my problems, but because you matter to me. Because in the months you've been here, you've become important to me. Do you understand the difference? She thought for a moment, then wrote, You're choosing me, not just helping me. Exactly, I'm choosing you. And I need you to know that choice is real. It's not going away. Whatever happens with Kirini, whatever happens with the courts, whatever complications arise, I've chosen you. That's permanent. She looked at the note she'd written, then at him. Her eyes were shining, but no tears fell. She reached out slowly and took his hand. Her fingers were small and thin. She squeezed once. The gesture said more than words could. He squeezed back. They sat like that for a while, in comfortable silence. Father and daughter in everything but law. The legal battle intensified when Kirini was formally notified of the adoption petition. She'd known it was coming, but seeing the official papers seemed to ignite something in her. She hired her own lawyer, an aggressive man named Mr. Pasemi, who specialized in contested family cases. He was expensive and ruthless. Within a week, he'd filed a counter-petition claiming that Dejuma was unfit to adopt due to marital instability and questionable judgment. The gloves were off. Takami called Dejuma with the news. They're going to fight dirty. Posemi's already requesting financial records, trying to prove you're using marital assets for personal projects. He's questioning your mental state, suggesting you're having some kind of crisis. He's going to paint you as unstable, impulsive, potentially dangerous to a vulnerable child. She paused. He's also going to use your marriage against you. Paint Kirini as the victim of your abandonment. Make it seem like you chose a street child over your wife. Let him try, Dejuma said. The truth is the truth. Our marriage was over long before Zafan arrived. But the truth, he was learning, was complicated. When Kirini gave her deposition, her lawyer shaped it carefully. Yes, they'd had fertility struggles. Yes, it had been difficult for both of them. But they'd been managing, attending counseling, working on their relationship. Then Dejuma had unilaterally brought home a child without discussion, without her consent, without regard for her feelings. He'd effectively chosen the child over their marriage. The deposition painted Dajuma as cold, obsessive, disconnected from his wife's emotional needs. It portrayed Karani as a suffering woman, abandoned by her husband in favor of a project that made him feel important. When Dajuma read the transcript, he barely recognized the people described, but he could see how it would play to a judge, how it constructed a narrative of his selfishness, his failure as a husband, his unsuitability as a parent. His own deposition was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Mrs. Takami coached him carefully. Be honest but measured. Don't get emotional. Don't badmouth Karani. Focus on Zafan, on her needs, on your ability to meet them. Don't make this about your marriage or your wife's failures. Make it about the child and what's best for her. The deposition lasted 4 hours. Mr. Posami was relentless, asking questions designed to make Dajuma look impulsive, irresponsible, more concerned with his ego than a child's welfare. Isn't it true you knew nothing about this child before bringing her into your home? Posami asked. That's correct, Dajuma answered. And you had no way of knowing if she was dangerous, disturbed, potentially violent? She was 7 years old and malnourished. I wasn't concerned about violence. But you were concerned enough to spy on her for 2 weeks before approaching her. Why the surveillance if you weren't suspicious? Dajuma kept his voice even. I was observing her situation, trying to understand her needs before intervening. Or you were indulging a fantasy, playing savior, making yourself feel important by rescuing a helpless child, Mrs. Takami objected. Argumentative and speculation. The mediator sustained it, but the damage was done. The insinuation hung in the air. Posami continued, question after question, painting Dajuma's compassion as ego, his care as obsession, his choice as abandonment of his wife. By the end, Dajuma felt exhausted and dirty, like he'd been defending something good and had it twisted into something sick. The custody evaluation required both Dajuma and Karini to undergo psychological assessment. A court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Wareni, met with each of them separately. Dajuma's session lasted 3 hours. Standard questions about childhood, relationships, motivations. Dr. Wareni was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. Why do you want to be a father? She asked. Dajuma thought carefully. Because I have resources, financial, emotional, practical, and I saw someone who needed them. Because providing for Zafan gives my life meaning it lacked before. Because I believe every child deserves a chance, and I'm in a position to give her one. And if the adoption fails, Dr. Wareni asked, if the court denies your petition? Dajuma felt his chest tighten. Then I've failed her, and I'll have to live with that. Would you continue to support her financially, even if you couldn't legally adopt her? Of course, she's already my daughter in every way that matters. A piece of paper won't change that. Dr. Wareni made notes. You seem very certain, very committed. Some might say obsessively so. Dajuma met her eyes. If caring deeply about a child's welfare is obsessive, then yes, I'm obsessed. Karini's session with Dr. Wareni was apparently very different. According to Mrs. Takami, who received the report later, Karini had been emotional, tearful. She'd described years of fertility treatments, the physical and emotional toll, the sense of failure that had consumed her. She'd portrayed Dajuma's adoption of Zafan as the ultimate betrayal, a public announcement that she was insufficient, that he'd given up on her, that he'd found an easier path to fatherhood than fighting for their own biological child. She positioned herself as the victim, Mrs. Takami explained, abandoned, humiliated, replaced. Is it working? Dajuma asked. Mrs. Takami shrugged. It's compelling. A judge will have sympathy for her position. But ultimately, this case isn't about your marriage. It's about what's best for Zafan. And on that front, we're on solid ground. The child is thriving in your care. She's gaining weight, excelling in her studies, showing emotional stability. Ms. Koremi's reports are all positive. Dr. Wareni will see that. The question is whether the marital conflict creates an unsuitable environment. The answer to that question became clearer when Fulara was called to testify. She'd worked in the house throughout the entire situation, seen everything, heard everything. Under oath, she described the separation, Karini's withdrawal, her refusal to interact with Zafan, her increasingly frequent absences from the home. Does Mrs. Karenni have any relationship with the child? Posemi asked. Falara shook her head. None. She avoids her, pretends she doesn't exist. And whose fault is that? I'm not here to assign fault, sir. I'm just stating facts. But Mr. Dejuma forced this situation, brought the child in without his wife's agreement, created this conflict. Isn't that true? Falara considered her answer carefully. Mr. Dejuma brought home a child who needed help. Mrs. Karenni could have chosen to help too. She chose differently. Both choices are theirs to own. It was a diplomatic answer that still landed solidly in Dejuma's favor. Posemi tried to shake her testimony, but Falara was unshakable. She'd seen what she'd seen. The child was loved, the wife was absent. Those were facts. The process dragged on for 18 months. Depositions and evaluations and home visits and reports. The house remained divided. Karenni's absences grew longer. When she was home, she and Dejuma communicated through lawyers or not at all. The atmosphere was toxic, but Zafan continued to thrive despite it. Or perhaps because of it, she'd lived through worse. This tension was manageable, predictable. She focused on her studies. Mr. Galami reported she was now reading at a 6th grade level. Her mathematics were even more advanced. She had a gift for numbers, for logic, for seeing patterns. She'd started painting too. Dejuma had bought her art supplies on a whim, watercolors, brushes, paper. She'd taken to it immediately. Her paintings were vivid and emotional. She painted scenes from the market, children playing, women carrying water, rivers and trees and faces full of expression. Mr. Galami said she was processing trauma through art. Giving voice to the things she couldn't speak, Dejuma hung her paintings throughout the main house, evidence of her presence, her personality, her worth. On Zafan's 9th birthday, they'd chosen a date arbitrarily since she didn't know her real birthday. Dejuma threw a party. He invited children from her tutoring group, kids she'd been studying alongside for months. He hired entertainers, filled the garden with balloons and streamers, had a cake made that was almost as tall as she was. Karenni didn't attend. She was traveling. Nobody asked where. The party was loud and chaotic and joyful. Zafan smiled more that day than Dejuma had ever seen. She laughed silently, her shoulders shaking, her eyes bright. But that night, after everyone had left, Dejuma found her sitting on her bedroom floor, crying without sound. He knocked gently, came in, sat beside her. "What's wrong?" he asked. She wrote with shaking hands. "I remember things sometimes, bad things." His heart clenched. "Do you want to tell me?" She shook her head violently, then hesitated. Wrote, "Not yet." He nodded. "That's okay. Whenever you're ready. Or never if you prefer. You don't owe anyone your pain. Not me. Not anyone." She leaned against him, her small body shaking with silent sobs. He held her, feeling helpless and angry. Angry at whoever had hurt her, at whatever she'd endured, at the world that had abandoned her to bridges and roadsides. He held her until the crying stopped, until her breathing evened out, until she fell asleep against his shoulder. He carried her to bed, covered her with blankets, and sat in the chair by her window for a long time, watching her sleep and wondering what monsters lived in her dreams. The breakthrough in the legal case came from an unexpected source. One of Karenni's friends, a woman named Mrs. Halaki, who'd attended the women's club meetings with her, contacted Mrs. Takami directly. She had information, she said, information that might be relevant to the case. Mrs. Takami met with her confidentially. What Mrs. Halaki revealed was damaging to Karenni's position. She described parties Karenni had hosted in the past year. Parties Dejuma didn't know about. Parties where a man named Makalo was frequently present. "They were close," Mrs. Halaki said carefully. "Very close. I don't have proof of an affair, but the implication was clear. He was there often. They disappeared together, whispered together. It was obvious to everyone." Mrs. Takami pressed for details, dates, times, other witnesses. Mrs. Haleki provided what she could. "I'm coming forward because I don't think it's right," she said. "Kirani's painting herself as the abandoned wife, but she abandoned the marriage first. Maybe not officially, maybe not legally, but emotionally, She left a long time ago. Armed with this information, Mrs. Takami began investigating Makalo. He was 38 years old, ran an import-export business, and had known Kareni for approximately 2 years. They'd met through mutual friends. Financial records showed they'd traveled together 3 times. Trips Kareni had claimed were women's retreats or charity work. Cell phone records, subpoenaed through the court, showed hundreds of calls and messages between them over the past 18 months. The pattern was clear. This wasn't just friendship. When confronted with the evidence, Kareni's legal strategy shifted dramatically. Posemi tried to argue that even if an affair existed, it was caused by Dajuma's abandonment, that Kareni had sought comfort elsewhere because her husband had chosen a child over her. But the timeline didn't support that narrative. The affair had begun before Zafan arrived. The relationship with Makalo had developed during a period when Kareni was supposedly working on her marriage. The affair wasn't a response to Zafan, it was independent. Prior, it undermined Kareni's entire position as the wrong spouse. The final court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. Almost 2 years after Dajuma had first filed the adoption petition, the courtroom was small and sterile, Judge Farini presiding. She was a woman in her 60s, known for being thorough and unsentimental. She'd reviewed all the reports, all the testimonies, all the evidence. Dajuma sat with Mrs. Takami on one side. Kareni sat with Posemi on the other. The distance between them was more than physical. Zafan was required to attend. She sat in the front row behind Dajuma, wearing a simple blue dress. Her hair was braided neatly. She looked calm, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Judge Farini looked at her for a long moment. "Zafan," she said gently, "I've read your written statements. I know you can't speak, but I want you to know that what you want matters in this decision. If you could write down right now whether you want to be adopted by Mr. Dajuma, I'd like to see that." A court official brought paper and a pen. Zafan wrote carefully, then handed the paper to the official, who handed it to the judge. Judge Farini read it aloud. "I want to be his daughter. He chose me when nobody else did. He made me feel like I matter. Please let me stay with him." The words hung in the air. Dajuma felt his throat close. Across the aisle, Kireni stared straight ahead, her face expressionless. Judge Farini set down the paper. "This court has reviewed extensive evidence," Judge Farini began. "The child in question has no known relatives. No one has claimed her. She was found in a state of abandonment and neglect. Mr. Dajuma intervened, provided care, and has demonstrated consistent commitment to her welfare over a period of nearly 2 years. The child is thriving in his care, physically, emotionally, educationally. Every evaluator has confirmed this." She paused. "The opposition has focused primarily on marital discord and questions of fitness. However, the evidence shows Mrs. Kareni has voluntarily separated herself from both the marriage and any parental role with the child." Judge Farini continued, her voice measured but firm. "Furthermore, evidence of extramarital involvement undermines Mrs. Kareni's position as an abandoned spouse. This court finds that Mr. Dajuma's decision to provide for this child, while perhaps unconventional, does not constitute abandonment of his marriage. Rather, it appears the marriage had deteriorated prior to the child's arrival. The child is not the cause of marital failure. She is merely present during it." She looked directly at Kareni. "Mrs. Kareni, do you wish to contest this adoption? To take custodial responsibility for the child?" Kareni stood slowly. For a moment she looked like she might speak, might fight. Then something in her face collapsed. "No, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I don't want custody. I never did." The honesty was startling. I didn't want it to be easy for him. I didn't want him to replace me so easily." Her voice cracked. "But I see now that's not what this is. She's not replacing anyone. She's just a child who needs a home, and I can't be the person who gives her that." Judge Farini nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Kareni. This court recognizes your pain. But this case is not about you or your husband. It's about a child's welfare. And on that measure, the decision is clear." She picked up her gavel. "The petition for adoption is granted. Zafan will legally become the daughter of Dajuma, effective immediately. Full parental rights are granted. Mrs. Kareni's parental claim, which was never established through any active participation, is terminated. This adoption is final and irrevocable. The gavel fell. The sound echoed in the small room. Zafan's eyes went wide. She looked at Dejuma, a question on her face. He nodded, smiling through tears he didn't bother hiding. "You're my daughter now," he said. "Officially, legally, forever." She stood up, walked to him, and he pulled her into his arms. She was shaking. He realized she was crying too, silently the way she did everything. Relief pouring out, fear releasing, a lifetime of uncertainty ending in one moment of legal declaration. Behind them, Kareni left the courtroom without a word. Posemi gathered his papers and followed. They didn't look back. Mrs. Takami shook Dejuma's hand, congratulated him, reminded him there would be paperwork to finalize. But Dejuma barely heard her. He was holding his daughter, his actual, legal, permanent daughter. The girl who'd been sitting on a concrete block 2 years ago was now his. The girl who couldn't speak had still managed to find her way into his life and change everything. The divorce proceedings began 2 months later. Kareni filed on grounds of irreconcilable differences. Dejuma didn't contest it. There was nothing left to contest. The marriage had been a corpse for years. The adoption battle had just formalized its death. They divided assets through lawyers. Kareni wanted the vacation house on the coast, several investment properties, and a substantial cash settlement. Dejuma agreed to all of it. He wanted it finished. He wanted her gone. He wanted to start the next phase of his life without the weight of this broken relationship. The settlement negotiations were brutal in their own way. Posemi tried to maximize Kareni's payout, arguing she deserved compensation for years of supporting Dejuma's business, for enduring public humiliation, for sacrificing her potential career. Mrs. Takami countered with evidence of Kareni's affair, her voluntary separation, her abandonment of marital duties. They went back and forth for months. Finally, they reached an agreement. Kareni would receive the vacation house, a property portfolio worth approximately $30 million, and a cash payment of $50 million. She would relinquish all claims to Dejuma's businesses and the main residence. The financial loss was significant, but Dejuma didn't care. Money had always come easily to him. He'd rebuild what he lost. But time with Safan, stability for her, peace in their home, those were irreplaceable. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday in November, 3 years after he'd brought Safan home from the bridge. 3 years of legal warfare, emotional devastation, and fundamental transformation. The judge signed the papers. The marriage was dissolved. Kareni left the courthouse and got into a car where Makalo was waiting. They drove away together. Dejuma went home to Zafan. She was in the garden painting. She looked up when he arrived, a question in her eyes. "It's done," he said. "The divorce is final. Kareni is gone. It's just us now." Safan set down her brush. She picked up her notepad and wrote, "Are you sad?" He thought about that. "No," he said honestly. "I'm relieved. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. Like a weight I didn't know I was carrying is finally gone." She wrote, "What about her? Where will she go?" "She has her own life now, her own choices. That's not our concern anymore." Safan nodded slowly. She wrote, "I hope she's happy, even though she didn't like me. I hope she finds what she needs." The grace of that statement stunned him. After everything, the rejection, the hostility, the legal battles, this child still had compassion for the woman who tried to remove her. "You're a better person than most adults I know," Dejuma said. Zafan smiled slightly and shrugged. She went back to her painting. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The house felt different without Kareni's angry presence. Lighter, more peaceful. Fulara still came every day, now more as family than hired help. She'd grown attached to Zafan, taught her to cook traditional dishes, to braid hair in complex patterns, to tell when the rainy season was coming by reading the sky. Mr. Galami continued tutoring sessions 3 times a week. Zafan was now reading at a high school level. She'd developed a particular love for history and science. She asked questions through written notes that challenged Mr. Galami's knowledge. Dejuma's businesses continued to thrive. The construction industry was booming. He secured contracts for 2 major housing developments and a government building project. Money flowed in. He reinvested some, saved some, and created a trust fund for Zafan. Whatever happened to him, she would be financially secure. But more than that, he wanted to teach her about money, about business, about building something meaningful. She was only 11 now, but she was smart enough to understand basic concepts. He started bringing her to the factories occasionally, showing her how things worked, how raw materials became finished products, how business deals were negotiated, how workers were managed fairly. She absorbed it all with the same intense focus she brought to everything. She asked questions, made observations. One day, she pointed out an inefficiency in the packaging process that was costing time. Dajuma implemented her suggestion, and it saved 4 hours a week. He told her she had a gift for seeing what others missed. She wrote, "Maybe because I spent so long just watching. You learn a lot when you're invisible." The comment struck him. How much had she learned in those months on the street? What skills had she developed through pure observation? What intelligence had been wasted because nobody noticed her? He thought about all the other children like her, the invisible ones, the forgotten ones, the ones sitting by roadsides hoping someone would see them. He started to form an idea. It grew slowly over months. He discussed it with Mrs. Takami, with financial advisors, with Safan herself. "I want to start something," he told her one evening. They were having dinner together, just the two of them. "A foundation for children like you were, street children, orphans, kids with nowhere to go. I want to create a home, a real home, with teachers and counselors and people who care, where children aren't just warehoused but actually raised, educated, given opportunities." He paused. "I want to name it after your mother, after the woman who brought you into this world and tried her best to keep you safe." "What was her name?" Zafan's hand trembled as she wrote. She'd never written about her past before, never shared those details. "Her name was Essa," she wrote. "Same as mine was, before." Dajuma read the words carefully. "Then we'll call it Issa's Light, a place where children can be seen, where they matter, where they're given the chances they deserve." Zafan's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to write more. The emotion was too big, too overwhelming. Her mother, who died alone and forgotten, would be remembered, would be honored, would have her name attached to something good. The foundation took a year to establish properly. Dajuma bought a large property on the outskirts of the city. Not too far from civilization, but far enough to have space, gardens, room to breathe. He hired architects who specialized in child-friendly designs. They created a building that felt like a home, not an institution. Individual rooms, not dormitories. Common spaces that encouraged community but respected privacy. Classrooms equipped with modern materials. A library, an art studio, a music room, play areas. Everything a child might need to heal and grow. Staffing was crucial. Dajuma interviewed personally. He wanted teachers who saw children as individuals, not problems. Counselors who understood trauma. House parents who could provide genuine care. He offered good salaries to attract quality people. He established strict policies against abuse, neglect, or any mistreatment. Background checks were thorough. References were verified multiple times. He wasn't building a warehouse. He was building a family. A temporary family for some, a permanent one for others. But always a family. Safan helped with everything. She was 12 now, mature beyond her years. She consulted on room designs, suggesting what would make children feel safe. She helped select books for the library, choosing titles that had helped her. She tested the art supplies, making sure they were good quality. She wrote a manual for staff about communicating with children who couldn't speak, drawing from her own experience. Her insights were invaluable. This wasn't just Dajuma's project. It was theirs, together. The foundation opened on a Saturday in June. 20 children were enrolled in the first group. Ages ranged from 5 to 14. All had been living on the streets or in inadequate orphanages. All had known hunger, neglect, instability. Some could speak, some couldn't. Some had physical disabilities. Some had psychological scars. All were given the same thing: a chance, a home, a future. Dajuma stood at the entrance with Zafan, watching them arrive. Some came in cars sent to collect them. Some walked, carrying everything they owned in plastic bags. One girl arrived with absolutely nothing, just her body and her hope. A reporter from the local newspaper was there, covering the opening. He'd been intrigued by the story. Wealthy businessman opens high-quality children's home, names it after unknown woman. He asked Ajuma the obvious questions. Why this? Why now? Why dedicate so much money to children you don't know? Dajuma gave his prepared answers about social responsibility and giving back and believing every child deserves opportunity. The reporter wrote it all down. Then he turned to Zafan. And you? He asked. Why are you here? Zafan looked at the reporter, then at Dajuma, then back at the reporter. She opened her mouth. Everyone who knew her expected nothing. She hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since whatever trauma had stolen her voice. Dajuma put a hand on her shoulder, intending to explain she couldn't speak, offered to let her write instead. But then something impossible happened. Sound came out, rough and unpracticed, cracking on the syllables, but unmistakable. Real. Actual words. Because, Zafan said, her voice small and uncertain but clear, my mother deserves to be remembered. The reporter's pen stopped moving. Dajuma's hand on her shoulder tightened. His face showed shock and joy and grief all tangled together. He hadn't known. She hadn't warned him, hadn't written that she'd been practicing, that she'd been working with her voice in private, that she'd decided this moment, this specific moment, was important enough to break 5 years of silence. She looked up at Dajuma. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Thank you, she said. The words were still rough, still uncertain. For choosing me, for keeping me, for believing I was worth it. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she pushed through. For giving my mother's name meaning, for making something good from something terrible. Dajuma couldn't speak. His throat was closed, his eyes burning with tears he didn't try to hide. He pulled her close while cameras flashed and children watched, and somewhere in the city, in the ground where unnamed bodies were buried, perhaps Essa's spirit felt this moment, felt her daughter speaking, felt her name being honored, felt justice in the most unexpected form. The reporter recovered first. This is your daughter? He asked Dajuma. Yes, Dajuma managed to say. This is Zafan. She hasn't spoken in years. I didn't know she could. Why now? The reporter asked Zafan gently. She considered the question. Her voice was getting stronger with use. Because silence was protection. When the world is dangerous, quiet keeps you safe. But this, she gestured at the building, at the children, at everything her father had built. This is safe. This is good. And good things should be spoken about. The reporter's article appeared in the paper the next day. The headline read, Billionaire's adopted daughter breaks 5 years of silence to honor her mother's memory. The story went viral. Local radio stations picked it up. Television news wanted interviews. The foundation became famous not for the building or the money, but for the story behind it. The story of a man who saw a child on a roadside and chose her. The story of a marriage that ended because of that choice. The story of a girl who couldn't speak but still managed to communicate love. Donations started pouring in. Other wealthy individuals wanting to support the foundation. Companies offering free services. Universities offering to send volunteer tutors. The foundation's capacity expanded from 20 children to 40, then 60. They had to buy adjacent properties to accommodate everyone. But quality never suffered. Each child still received individual attention, personal care, genuine love. The model was expensive, but it worked. Children thrived. They healed. They grew. They became who they were meant to be before trauma interrupted their path. Zafan never spoke much after that initial breakthrough. Her voice remained a precious thing, used sparingly, carefully. She communicated primarily through writing still. But when she did speak, people listened. Her words carried weight because of their rarity. She became involved in the foundation's counseling program, working with children who couldn't speak. She understood their silence in ways no one else could. She knew it wasn't defiance or stubbornness. It was survival, protection. A wall built against a world that had proven dangerous. She taught them it was okay to be silent, that they could communicate in other ways, that their worth wasn't determined by their ability to speak. But she also showed them, through her own example, that silence could be broken when safety was established. That voice could return when trust was rebuilt. That speaking was a choice, not an obligation, and they could make that choice whenever they were ready. Some children spoke again within months. Some took years. Some never did. All were valued equally. 3 years after the foundation opened, when Zafan was 15, a woman appeared at the gates. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, her face lined with age and regret. She asked to speak with Dajuma. Security called up to the house. Dajuma came down personally. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman's hands were shaking. "My name is Mrs. Tinato," she said. The name meant nothing to Dajuma. He waited. "I saw the article about your daughter, about Isa's light, about the woman the foundation is named after." Dajuma felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What about her?" Mrs. Tinato's voice was barely a whisper. "Isa worked for my family 15 years ago. She was our housemaid. She had a small daughter. We sent them away when Isa got sick. We were afraid of contagion, afraid of responsibility. We made them leave." She was crying now. "I didn't know what happened to them. Didn't think about it much. Tried not to think about it. Then I saw that article. Saw your daughter's age. Saw the name. And I realized." "Realized what?" Dajuma asked, though he was beginning to understand. Mrs. Tinato looked up at him. "That your daughter is that little girl, the one who cried when her mother died, the one we could have saved if we'd just helped, if we'd just been human." She was shaking violently now. "I need to see her. I need to apologize. I need her to know that I'm sorry, that I've regretted it every day since, that I've tried to be better, to help others, to make up for what I did." Dajuma studied her, saw genuine remorse, genuine pain, but also saw the person who'd sent a sick woman and her child into the streets to die, the person whose actions had created Zafan's trauma, had stolen her voice, had destroyed her childhood. "Does Zafan know?" Mrs. Tinato asked. "Does she remember us?" "I don't know," Dajuma said. "She's never told me the details of her past. She wrote once that she remembers bad things. But she's never said what." "Please," Mrs. Tinato begged, "let me apologize to her. Let me try to make amends." Dajuma wanted to refuse, wanted to protect Zafan from this woman, but he also knew healing sometimes required confrontation, required facing the sources of pain. "I'll ask her," he said finally. "If she wants to see you, I'll allow it. If she doesn't, you leave and never come back. Her choice, her decision, her trauma to manage however she needs to." He went inside and found Zafan in her room, studying for exams. She was preparing for university entrance tests, hoping to study psychology so she could better help traumatized children. He explained the situation carefully, Mrs. Tinato's arrival, her claims, her request. Zafan listened without interruption. Her face was unreadable. When he finished, she sat silently for a long time. Then she wrote, "I remember her. I remember all of them. The big house, my mother cleaning, being told to be quiet, to stay out of the way. Then my mother getting sick, coughing blood. Mrs. Tinato's daughter screaming that we had to leave, that we would make everyone sick. The door closing behind us." Dajuma read the words, his heart breaking for the 4th or 5th or 100th time for this girl. "Do you want to see her?" he asked gently. Zafan thought about it, wrote, "Yes, but not to forgive her, to show her who I became despite her, to show her that she didn't break me." Dajuma nodded. "I'll bring her up." He paused. "You don't have to be kind. You don't have to make her feel better. You can say whatever you need to say, or nothing at all." Mrs. Tinato was brought to the living room. Zafan came down the stairs slowly, each step measured. She'd chosen to wear one of her best dresses, to look strong, successful, unbroken. Mrs. Tinato gasped when she saw her. "You look so much like your mother," she whispered. Zafan didn't respond, just sat down across from the woman and waited. Mrs. Tinato started crying immediately. "I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. What we did was unforgivable, inhuman. I've carried the guilt for 15 years. Safan watched her cry, felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, just emptiness where those emotions might have been. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. You're sorry now, 15 years later, after my mother died alone, after I lived on the streets, after I lost my voice from screaming for help that never came. After all of that, now you're sorry. Tinato nodded miserably. I know it's not enough. I know nothing I say can undo the harm. But I needed you to know. I needed to try. Why? Zafan asked. Why do you need me to know? So you can feel better? So you can sleep at night? So you can tell yourself you apologize and therefore you're forgiven? Her voice was getting stronger, all the years of silent anger finding words. I don't forgive you. I don't absolve you. I don't make you feel better about what you did. You made a choice, a terrible, selfish choice. And you lived with the comfort of that choice while my mother died and I suffered. You don't get my forgiveness. You don't deserve it. Mrs. Tinato was sobbing openly now. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to be better. I volunteer now. I donate to charities. I try to help where I can. Safan's laugh was bitter. Good for you. How noble. How generous. You got to keep your wealth and your comfort and your family while doling out charity to ease your conscience. My mother got a nameless grave. I got trauma that will never fully heal. But you get to feel good about yourself for volunteering. How fair. Dejuma had never heard her speak this much, had never heard this edge in her voice. It was necessary, cathartic. Years of silence breaking open into righteous anger. Mrs. Tinato looked at her helplessly. What can I do? How can I make this right? You can't, Zafan said simply. That's the truth you came here to hear. You can never make this right. The damage is permanent. But you know what? I'm glad you can't fix it, because it means I get to keep this anger. I get to choose whether to forgive or not, and I choose not. Not today, maybe not ever. She stood up. You can leave now. You've apologized. I've heard it, but I don't accept it. I don't grant you peace. You'll carry this guilt for the rest of your life, and that's exactly what you deserve. Mrs. Tinato stood shakily. Your daughter, she began, looking at Dejuma. Your daughter was raised well. She's strong, honest, good. You did right by her. Then she left, escorted out by security. The door closed behind her. Zafan stood in the silent room for a moment. Then she started shaking. Dejuma held her while she cried. Not sad tears this time. Angry tears. Relief tears. The tears of someone who'd finally confronted their demons and refused to show mercy. I meant it, she whispered. I don't forgive her. I'm not ready. Maybe never. That's okay, Dejuma said. Forgiveness isn't required. It's not something you owe anyone. Your anger is yours. Your pain is yours. You get to keep it as long as you need it. But what if it makes me bitter? What if it ruins me? Her voice was small now, afraid. It won't, he promised. Because you're also building something good. Isa's light, your work with the children, your studies.